Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Tallon. I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League, and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts, and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services.
But actually, the point of a brand, that number one table stakes point of a brand, is to be different. Because if you're different, you're uniquely identifiable. If you're different, you're memorable. And if you're memorable, you're much more likely to get chosen.
Today I'm joined by Ragged Edge founder Max Ottignon, live at D&AD New Blood Festival, where we're continuing the thread from his fantastic talk, Things Will Never Be the Same Again, Branding in the Age of Convergence. We're digging deeper into the themes in his talk about rising above the sea of same, looking for the opportunity, the optimism in this turgid situation. This is the Creative Condition. How are you doing, guys? I hope you're well. My name is Ben Tallon. I am your host. Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, where we delve deep into the anatomy of creativity. Let's call it that. I've been drawing up my map this past week or so with the same title, The Anatomy of Creativity. It's a part of my coaching model that I'm developing, where there's going to be a workshop and talk, one-to-one long-term coaching, and a one-off session called Pit Stop, where we touch base, we work out the frustrations, the hopes, the dreams, the current situation, the childhood, and everything else. And we go through the entire anatomy of creativity to establish blind spots, flaws, weak spots, strengths, opportunities, to get you back on track with your optimal creativity so that you can make the right decisions for you. I'm very excited about it. It's a natural progression of this entire body of work, which is now spanning over 10 long years. Long in the best way, because it's been a real ride, and it's become my life's cause. I've said that many a time on this show. I never truly knew why I was doing this, why I was interviewing people. I was merely following my curiosity, expressing myself through my emotional creativity as opposed to the intellectual creativity we tend to use in our professional lives. So that's where you find me. So it's an absolute joy to get to talk to people like Max at events like D&AD New Blood Festival, because it's a coming together of all these people, which is no surprise, where Max and I met at Off Festival 2024, where we were both, well, Max was speaking, I was interviewing Stefan Sagmeister live, doing another live podcast, which I really love this interface. I think this is the fourth one that I've done. First was Brian Grimwood, legendary illustrator. The second, actually, the Brian Grimwood was with the AOI, which was really, really cool. Also a really good body doing great work in our industry. So Brian Grimwood, and then it was Anna Hollinrake, also at D&AD New Blood Festival. And it was Stefan Sagmeister live at Off Festival 2024. And now for the summer, Max and I are talking, because we had many deep chats at Off this year over a beer, because we were staying on the same hotel floor. So we'd end up convening at the bar after each day's talks that we were seeing, talks we were doing. And we managed to find a few good long sessions to get right into all of it, and we had a really good flow. We made a good connection, which I loved. I was well aware of Max's work and Ragged Edge long before this, and we bumped into each other in the lift, or the elevator if you're stateside. And we hit it off. It was a good connection. So I went back to him and pitched the idea to D&AD New Blood, and they bit straight away. And this is where you find us. It's a continuation of Max's talk, Branding in the Age of Convergence, because Max was worried about the sea of same, the algorithmic creativity made because it'll do. And that's it. it seemed to lack passion, and it seemed to want to tick a box so you could get the average, cheap solution at the cost of real thought-provoking artistic expression and creativity. So I wanted to get deeper into those themes after seeing his wonderful talk. If you get a chance to see it, do it. On that same theme, this week I also talked to Kyle Chaker, author of Filter World, How Algorithms Flattened Culture. Kyle is staff writer at The New Yorker who writes weekly on the internet. Not on the internet, obviously he posts on the internet, but about the internet. He's been there since the advent of it as a teenager, and he's a wonderful guy. And we also shared a stage at Cannes Lion this festival this year. Man, sorry, it's morning time. I'm all over the place. I've not had my coffee. Kyle was wonderful, and that's a big episode too. So it's exciting times for this show. Please do leave us a review, a little subscription, and some feedback is also valuable. I'd love to hear from you guys. Most importantly though, rate, review, subscribe, because it's really helpful for the show. So thank you if you've done that. I noticed a new one coming in on Spotify this week. It just helps to validate when people are browsing and looking for shows they might want to listen to. And I do this for pure passion, out of sheer love. So it is a massive help. So thank you guys if you've done that. And if not, please take the time to do it. Big thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, ever present, wouldn't be here without them, Illustration X, representing a global roster of illustration, animation and artistic talent. Great bunch of people. They do great work in the industry with the likes of the Society of Artists Agents, the AOI. They are pivotal in the likes of legislation around IP in the face of AI and all that stuff. So they are a really great bunch, and you should check them out, illustrationx.com, including their Trend X newsletter, which is really great. I keep mentioning it, but I think it's a wonderful idea because it just brings us some frontline discoveries and observations and enables us to make decisions about what we do with that data and information. So check them out. And also, big thank you to the Ukrainian Institute for their ongoing important work supporting the embattled Ukrainian creative community in this horrific time of war. Please help them out, especially if you're doing it from a place of privilege in comparison to what those guys are suffering at the moment. So please do take the time to help them out and connect with their Ukrainian creative community, which are very brave and very gifted, very talented, and they deserve all that love. So please do that and check them out at ui.org.ua. Currently looking for new partners for the show as well, new sponsors. So come on board. The numbers are growing. The cause is strong. Committed to this thing. Give me a shout. Let's have a chat. hello@bentallon.com, or you can hit me up on LinkedIn or Instagram, but I prefer the email. So hello@bentallon.com is the best way to get a quick response. Anyway, without further ado, you are going to find Max Ottignon and I picking up the conversation off the back of his talk. Things will never be the same again. Branding in the age of convergence. Keep an eye on Ragged Edge. They're easy to find. They're doing really, really great work with good clients. And we're going to get into some of that dynamic in this conversation. So that's enough from me. Enjoy. And a big thank you to D&AD New Blood for making this happen. It was a real pleasure to be in front of a live audience again. Right, well, the last time I did this, I completely forgot to introduce myself. Marie just did that, but I'm Ben Tallon. I'm an illustrator, author, and host of the Creative Condition podcast. And I met Max at Off Festival this year, and Max gave an amazing talk, which we're going to get into today. But first, I'm going to let Max introduce himself.
Cheers, Ben. Thanks for having me. I'm Max, co-founder of a branding agency called Ragged Edge.
I wanted to start with possibility because it's something that jumped out of your talk, which was called Things Will Never Be the Same Again. Branding in the Age of Convergence. So let's paint us a picture. What's the lay of the land just now, and what was the impetus for your concern and for the talk?
Yeah, I think for me, I've been in this industry quite a while. I've been running Ragged Edge 17 years. And I got into the industry because I felt like branding was this kind of like a magic trick where you could really transform how people thought about different industries, different brands, different products, different services. And the brands that were doing that were creating, like brands like Monzo or Oatly or whatever it is, were doing things that were just really fundamentally different to what had happened before. And for a bunch of different reasons that I'm sure we're going to get into, that's kind of stopped happening. And I think what we're starting to see, or what we've been starting to see over the last period of time, maybe it's 5 years, is stuff is getting just to feel more and more similar, and we're losing that distinctiveness, we're losing that difference, and we're starting to see this landscape, not just brands, but creativity in general, is feeling like it's flattening, and everything kind of looks the same.
I think there are many reasons why that might be. This homogeneity of everything at the moment, which is not exclusive, of course. There's good work, but I think that we're being funneled down these very narrow spheres of influence. So, a lot of people might go straight to Pinterest, for example, or Google Images. And we mentioned him this morning, but Sean Thomas from JKR said to me, going back a few years now, he said that, people said, look, it's a long way off before AI, for example, can do this, can do design, can do branding. His concern was that wasn't going to remain the case if we all went to those same places for inspiration and we all followed the trend and refused to challenge that. I think that's completely true. And you hit upon something there which is really important, which was magic trick, wonder. These are feelings that I think that most people would agree is why a lot of us want to get into this industry, because I see it as alchemy, what we do. It gives us autonomy, it gives us a personal voice. Is that something you always placed great importance on when you started Ragged Edge?
The autonomy?
Wonder.
Yeah, I think so. Like for me, like any creative profession, any creative job is about making a choice, isn't it? We've all chosen to be in this industry. And I think the reason why we choose it is because of that possibility. We've all got that creativity inside us, and we want to have an opportunity to be paid to express it and to create stuff that's new and different and that we've never done before, and like maybe the world's never done before. That's the excitement. That's why we're all here in this building today. That's why we're all in this industry or trying to get into this industry. That's what is special about it, I think. If you lose that, it becomes a very different industry.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that I think it's safe to say that, unstable economies plays a part.
Yep.
When I get the chance to visit agencies that I think are doing things the right way, that are challenging trends, and they've got a voice, I would include your agency, of course, in that. There's a consistency there, and I come away from those places buzzing, feeling like I've been back in art college, because there's a crackle and the people seem alive, and there seems to be this thing where no matter the hierarchy, no matter the position a person is in, they've got autonomy, they've got a voice, they're respected for their role within that culture. What role as an agency founder do you play in checking that is permitted and working with the right clients that enable that autonomy throughout, that actually cherish what you do as opposed to a transactional relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I guess two things there. One is the culture that you create in the agency. And I think what you hit on is bang on, that you have to create a space that encourages ideas, and it encourages ideas from everywhere. And like you talk about like psychological safety and people feeling like they can express themselves, people like they feel like they can express an opinion without being told, no, that's wrong or that's stupid. Like that just kills creativity straight away. So you have to try, and we try quite hard. We don't always get it right, but we try really hard to make sure that anyone who's at Ragged Edge has got that confidence, that psychological safety to be able to express an opinion, to come up with an idea, and to not be scared of being wrong. Then, of course, you got the clients, which is the second part. And we got Alex and Steph in the room here today, and a big part of they help bring in the new business. And the main part of their job really is trying to figure out, like, we're lucky enough to have quite a lot of like inbound from clients, lots of inquiries. And so our job becomes like, how do we find the people who've got the right mindset, the right mentality, that are going to respond well to ideas, and are the kind of people that are going to embrace possibility, the kind of people that aren't going to shut you down if you do something that's not quite right, and that can see possibility where other people see problems, I guess. And that we talk about it as a change maker mindset. But that mindset, like whether it's at Ragged Edge in the team or whether it's the clients, like that is probably the most important thing. Like everything else we can get past, like whatever industry they're in, whatever product it is, it kind of doesn't matter. It's that mentality that's the thing that's going to tell us whether we can work well, whether we can do great creative work.
Yeah, because it transcends the current moment. It transcends breaking even or profit. And don't get me wrong, we live in a capitalist world. That's important. Of course, we've got to bring that to clients,
Yep.
But I'm a big believer that you do that far more if you can bring genuine creativity and humanity and storytelling and original ideas. Now, don't get me wrong, I've heard it said that there's no true thing as original because human history and the sheer ubiquity of people on this planet, that's fine, but you can still, your voice is always unique no matter what. Every individual, every one of us. So I think that part of the job to kind of break through this current malaise is to remind people that every single one of their stories is valid and that there's great value to that. And if you can bring that into a culture like you just described, where it's valued, where it's encouraged, and you can develop it with the input of other people from other backgrounds, which is, again, why diversity is so important, then I think everybody wins. And this goes beyond any one agency, doesn't it? That's then the culture that we're in. That's the buzz of the creative industries.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the things that we've really learned, doing this stuff for a while is like every project that we do it's not one person's project. It's the product of a whole different set of experiences, different set of skills, different set of perspectives, different set of mindsets. And the magic is bringing that all together. And as soon as you don't have that, as soon as you start to narrow it down, make it all about one person, make it all about one set of ideas, that's when you start to constrict the creativity and then constrict the result as a consequence of that.
One of the really interesting parts of your talk that grabbed me was the idea, the importance of the idea, as opposed to starting with an aesthetic. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think when you've got a blank page in front of you, the natural thing is to reach for things that already exist, to try and find inspiration in things that already exist. You talked about Pinterest earlier, and I think Pinterest is like a really easy way, and all those different tools like Pinterest, a really easy way of just finding stuff that maybe that's a starting point, a creative starting point. The problem is that way of thinking, you're starting with an aesthetic, what something looks like. And if you're starting from an aesthetic, even if you move that aesthetic forward a little bit, it's still always going to feel derivative. It's always going to feel like something that you've seen before, because all it is an aesthetic. What we've tried to do really, really hard is start from an idea, start from a concept. And so a big part of Ragged Edge is like, don't bring visual references, bring, something different to start with. And it might be a song lyric, it might be a meme, it might be a poem, it could be anything. But it has to have like an idea at the heart, not just a visual aesthetic. And what that means, once you've got something a bit richer, a bit deeper, that's not just like the surface, what that starts to do is it really starts to open up possibility, because there's so many different ways to express an idea. There's so many different visual, verbal ways to express an idea. So for me, like aesthetic constrains possibility, starting with an aesthetic, but starting with an idea opens it up. And I think once you start to do that, that's when you start to be able to go in really interesting, different directions, and you remove some of the constraints that you might otherwise have had.
Yeah, because then you've got you've got narrative and you've got something that enlivens everybody, and that then unlocks something in the psyche where all those lived experiences start to gush and take on new forms. And that's when the technology becomes an enabler, because you're feeding this wonderful tools, impressive stuff with humanity, with something fresh and something felt. You go back over any iconic campaign that was that successful. I'm a big fan of Sir John Hegarty's work, and I found him a fascinating human. And he talked about, references from his childhood growing up in a busy Irish household, and observations from things that his grandmother said, or arguments in the house, and how creative people tend to be great observers. They listen and they watch and they soak that stuff up. You put that stuff into technology and that's when you've got magic. Yeah. But if you start with the technology and you limit yourself to that interface and that tool, whether that's because it's a comfort zone or whether it's because it's the only thing you can think to do, that's when it's kind of antithetical to creativity.
Yeah, totally. One bit of advice I always, like Sir John Hegarty, that always sticks with me is he said, don't walk around with headphones on. And I think that's the same thing, isn't it? And just be open to the world around you and to absorbing everything, because you just never know, and it'll probably happen subconsciously. You never know where an idea is going to come from, and if you take yourself away from that and plug yourself into a bit of tech, you're creating constraints on yourself.
Yeah, massively. You could be stumbling around with a hangover or really tired, and you might just glean something that just, like you said, fizzes by. But it's worth remembering that we're only consciously aware of 5% of what's going on in here. 95%, is going on some other level. So I think that's kind of liberating, because that takes away that paralyzing fear that I think comes with the feeling that I should be doing X, Y, and Z, that I should be remembering that fact and I should be knowing about that topic. Live your life. Feel the magic in the world around you. And I think your brain kind of does the rest, and it banks it. And I think there's something wonderful about that.
Yeah, you have to free it up, don't you? And you have to let it do that stuff. It's why everyone always talks about coming up with great ideas in the shower, isn't it? It's because you're not thinking about other stuff and you're letting your mind wander. Yeah. And suddenly you've got the answer.
Yeah, active boredom is really important, because the unconscious is every bit as important as the conscious mind. But if the conscious is constantly clogged up with TikTok nonsense or whatever else it might be, then it ain't going to do that. And that's when you start to burn out or feel unenthused. And that brings us on to social media. And how destructive do you feel that the role of the algorithm is? And I mean with specific reference to chasing validation through those platforms. That might be a like, it might be a comment, it might be the crushing feeling of logging back in 2 hours later after posting a piece of work and seeing it's been liked twice. I think that's having a really damaging effect on our feeling of self-worth. Is that something you'd agree with?
Yeah, we were talking about it earlier, weren't we? And posting something on social media and putting yourself out there is something we all have to do at every stage of our career. It's quite intimidating, and it's also, people are, as we all know, quite negative on social media. It's quite a scary thing to do, isn't it? So there's definitely that negativity around that. But I think that the thing with the algorithms that I find quite, almost this may be overly dramatic, but quite distressing, is the incentives around it are all wrong. And what these tech platforms are all they're all promising to be to sort of unlock creativity and to democratize creativity. All these big, vague promises that we can all get excited by and really buy into. But actually, what they incentivize is everybody doing the same thing. And you think about TikTok's a great example, right? With its attention algorithm, where actually the way to be successful on TikTok is to jump on a trend and to post the same thing that everybody else is posting with the same soundtrack, doing the same dance moves or whatever it is, or remix of the guy in finance or whatever it is. even in the same tone of voice, and even like if you like there's just like a weird like TikTok voice, isn't there? Like that everybody for some reason has to post in that voice because they know that if you do it in that way, the algorithms are going to reward you, and that's true not just on TikTok. It's true on every social platform. It's true on search engines. So people design search engines now for robots, for SEO. Not for people. Sorry, they design websites for the search engines for SEO. It's true in everything we see. We talked about coffee shops, didn't we? And like how there's this sort of Instagram aesthetic for them. Netflix now, like everything is created not for humans but for the algorithm. And so what we're seeing everywhere, and this is not a new observation, but like what we're seeing everywhere is just like this. Flattening of culture, isn't it? And where particularly aesthetics, but kind of everything is starting to look the same because we are all incentivized to make stuff that looks the same.
Yeah, and that sounds negative, and I think that it is. But what I find great optimism is, and in all of this, is the fact that these conversations are now happening, and they're quite overt. So you and I are having this conversation today. I was recently part of a seminar at Cannes Lions Festival. I was painting on the side of the stage as there was a seminar around disrupting the kind of algorithmic creativity. I think there's an awareness that's starting to happen now of the place that we're at. So on that basis, it brings me optimism because once we become consciously aware and we start to understand the box that we've been put in, I think that is the first step in breaking through that. Do you feel the same?
Yeah, passionately. I think where we are now, where we are seeing this like flattening of culture, we are seeing the algorithms dictating everything. What, like you say, what that gives you is this huge, huge opportunity. Because if everybody else is doing one thing, like it's easy actually to stand out because all you have to do is something different. And we need to, as creatives, that is our job now, and particularly in the industry that I work, branding, where it's all about distinctiveness. It's all about trying to create something that is unique, different, memorable. Like in some ways, you could argue that it's kind of easier than ever because everything else looks the same. And so our main job is to just find a way of coming up with something and a different visual language, a different verbal language, creating something that feels unique. And to me, that is, for the whole industry, that is a massive, massive opportunity.
I think so. There was a brilliant bit in your talk about agriculture and branding and the origin of. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, you think about like the origin of branding is farmers literally branding their livestock. And why do they do that? They do that to make sure that you can recognize their cows in a field of loads of other people's different cows. So what they are doing is, like, the whole point of branding, back to when farmers started doing that, was to make their product, service, organization, cow uniquely identifiable. That is the whole point of branding, and it remains so to this day. And I think we've all forgotten that. And I think, like Ragged Edge, we've been, I feel like throughout my career and throughout the agency, we've been fighting this battle the whole time where people think that a brand is about trust and it's about credibility, and they think that a brand is about creating something that looks like the thing that people expect, because that makes people trust it, that makes people reassure it, or feel reassured by it. But actually, the point of a brand, that number one table stakes point of a brand, is to be different. Because if you're different, you're uniquely identifiable. If you're different, you're memorable. And if you're memorable, you're much more likely to get chosen. Like, being different to everybody else is fundamental. It is the number one job. If your brand only does that, you've kind of done your job. If it doesn't do that, to me, it's not a brand.
I think you're right. And I think that also that has to come with, different for different sake equally isn't going to work. It's about difference with a story and an idea and an actual empathy and understanding of the brand and listening to the origin story of that brand and first learning the culture of it all and spending time. I had a recent podcast conversation where the founder of another agency talked about spending at least half a day with the client before they even sit down to do business at the table to try and understand their problem and work out where they are, what they want to shift or what they want to maintain, before then getting to the ideas. Is that something you do? You know, do you challenge your clients? Are you willing to challenge something that you feel is less than adequate?
Yeah, I think getting to know and getting to understand. It's easy to challenge, but I think to be effective at that, you really have to understand their business, their problem, their challenge. And so we will, before we start doing any work, before we start making any decisions or really having any opinions, we will do an immersion process that will be a number of days spent with the client, getting to know how they work. But always, and again, the thing that sort of Steph and Alex are always talking about in these new business conversations is we are going to challenge you, and we're going to push, and we're going to hold very strong opinions. We're going to come in with bold opinions because you need that, but also we're going to hold them loosely because we're going to create these ideas together. And so our job is to challenge, but it's not to do it in a way that's kind of like blind. It's not to do it in a way that's like pig-headed and forcing through work that the client doesn't believe in. Yeah. But we have to start from a point of pushing and challenging and pushing people to the edges of what's possible. You
do. That's it. And it's about respect. I think I have a recent personal example, and it was the seminar that I mentioned with TBWA. So I was delighted to get this gig. They asked me to paint on a 2.5 metre by 2 metre canvas directly in response to a real-time conversation about algorithmic creativity. And so we jumped on a call about a week ahead of the thing to run through the running order. And I was on a call with the TBWA's CEO and all these people with all these lofty titles. And they were really lovely, a really great bunch of people. And in this conversation, you know, they sort of came to the table with the sense that what I was doing might be a literal roadmap of how we change this, you know, change the landscape and disrupt. And something sank in my gut, and it was that instinctive feeling that this was off the mark, this was wrong, this was, you know, here was a conversation with a New Yorker author and an amazing director in the States. And yet I was almost being pushed in a direction that was, you know, something you get in a corporate conference where people want the thing literally relaying. And that was no mistake of the clients. That was just, they hadn't really done this before. This was a new, exciting thing for them. And the only reference points they had were what had gone before. Very quickly, I said, to not overstep my mark here, but for this to be its best, to get the best out of me, and given the understanding of this conversation, we need to be responsive. We need to be spontaneous. This needs to be quite abstract. And I saw people kind of start applauding quietly on the Zoom conversation. And in my younger years, I might not have had the balls to challenge somebody with CEO in their title. Simple as that. And so hierarchy and respect can sometimes get in the way of creativity. But in my opinion, it's more respectful to voice an opinion that is considered and is warm and is done for the right reasons than to be subservient.
Yeah, totally. How did the CEO react?
She loved it. She was excited. At the end of the day, it was something off her plate. She knew that I was bringing some ideas and that I had an understanding of what was needed. And it was just one less thing for her to do on a really simple level. But by the end of it, they were all delighted with it, and it was just a great team effort. And to their credit, they listened. They didn't. There was no ego in the room. It was brilliant, and everybody won. And I think when you can foster that culture, no matter whether it's in advertising, branding, graphic design, it doesn't matter. I think that everybody brings something that's valuable.
Yeah, and the right successful people. So presumably that CEO had gotten to that place for being really good at her job, and successful people are able to be challenged and embrace it. And so you work with those kind of people, like they're going to respond to positively, aren't they? As long as you do it with empathy and as long as you do it politely, which
very much
so. Would have done.
I think that most people, like you and I, they had to work their way up a ladder. But ultimately, they probably got into the industry for the want of magic, just like we said earlier. They wanted also to feel that buzz. So if everyone's just bowing down and giving them what is expected, that's flying in the face of what an ad agency or a branding agency should be. People come to our companies or us as freelancers for creativity, for spark. And I think that there's a lot of fear in our culture at the moment and anxiety, speaking broadly, speaking political, speaking just out there. And I do think that feeds into decision making as well. So it's up to us to be somewhat renegade and maverick and actually see that coming, but do it in the right way.
I think that's really true. And like, to just pick up on that, when like times are hard, so like the economy has been in weird places for the last few years, what you tend to see with clients that gets passed down through to agencies, which gets passed on to the individual people doing the work, is fear. Because people are worried about their, at a company level, they're worried about their bottom line. At a personal level, they're worried about their jobs. And so that inhibits the work. And so in times like we're in at the moment, what you start to see is, and this plays into what we were talking about earlier about this like sea of sameness, is you start to see people taking, as an industry, the industry stops taking risks. And you start to see stuff that you can see it in the work. You can see the fear in the work. And that's really like tough to see. And I can see that in our industry now. You can see when people release projects, you can see the inhibition. And I think our job as creative people is to try and create the environment with our clients where we reduce that feeling of fear, we reduce that nervousness, so that we're in a space where we can create that safety that we talked about, that psychological safety to do the things that feel brave, to do the things that are going to push the client, to do the things that feel risky, but are probably actually the smart, sensible thing to do. They're probably the least risky things to do.
And if risk can take place in an environment like a creative agency, the client kind of doesn't need to know about it. That can go on if you create the right culture in a company, and all that can go on. And by the time you get to the presentable results, hopefully the risk lives in a really tangible way that is going to make the client feel alive.
Yeah, but actually, like, one of the things that we've tried to evolve, and it's been really interesting, is actually like bringing the client into that process. We used to have this fear, I guess, of showing the inner workings of our mind. Like we all know as creatives that like sometimes the inner workings of our brains are maybe a bit messy. And a bit unusual and maybe quite different to other people. But actually, and so we used to keep that separate from the client. And we used to like do that all. It was almost like a black box. And then we would appear at certain points in the project to do this nice polished presentation that felt very finished, that felt very considered, that felt like it took away all that risk. But actually what we've learned to do, and this takes confidence and it takes real comfort and a great relationship with the client, is to try and bring the client into that process and to try and open it up. And every time we've done that, it's just, we've seen so much benefit from it. Because number one, the clients love to be part of it. They love seeing that process. It helps them understand why we've got to certain decisions, how we've got to certain decisions. And what it helps is it helps create a real sense of shared collaboration and of shared sort of ownership over the work. By showing it when we feel nervous, when we feel like it's actually scary to share that level of unfinished work, they love it because they can be part of the creation, and they don't feel like they're being presented something that they could have inputted into 2 weeks ago and changed something. So I think as agencies, we have to get over that, and as creative people, we have to get comfortable like letting people into our brains a little bit more, maybe, because they find it exciting.
I think it's a really good point, and I'll tell you who does that very well. Dix and Baxi do that brilliantly, and I've talked to Simon twice, Simon Anapova on the podcast twice, but Simon specifically talks about resonance and about the passion that lives in the work, and how you can't and shouldn't ever have the liberty of explaining X, Y, and Z in a finished piece of work. But if you truly feel it at development stage and welcome the client into that part of the process, that it will sing in the final work and it will in some way endear itself to the end user. And he talks about their rebranded AC Milan and Everton football clubs. And he talks about how they've done these day trips to the San Siro, and they took the staff out to immerse them in the culture to get the feeling of all that. And how ultimately the love and the journey of that project sang in the final work, but they couldn't ever be in the stands, stood behind a fan going, well, you see, we positioned the curve of that logo because of it's just not going to happen, and nor should it. But it still lives and sings in the final work. And I think you're right. I think by bringing the client in and giving them respect of being a part of that thinking, what a great buzz for that client as well. That's probably the highlight of the, well, it might not be, maybe I'm being, facetious there, but I think it could be the highlight.
I know, I think you're right. And like clients often tell us that the meetings that we have are their favorite meetings of the week or whatever, sometimes ever, because they get to be part of this exciting process. And they get to be part of something that's like very different to, maybe some of their sort of, presenting PowerPoints at each other and sending emails and stuff. They suddenly get to be part of this amazing, rich, fun process. And yeah, I think like in terms of seeing it in the work, I think you really can. And what we've learned again, and we have had to learn this, is if a client has been part of the creation, they're much more likely to understand the work, they're much more likely to believe in the work. And what that means is that when the branding agency or the creative agency kind of isn't in the room or has finished the project or whatever, the client's going to champion that work still. And so with a branding agency, what we're trying to do is create this idea and this system that can live in the real world, but we rely on the client sometimes to make it live. And so if we can impart that belief and conviction in the work while we're in the room, then when we leave the room, they're going to retain that. And that's going to make it much, much more likely that the work lives in real life, in the real world. And thus, in Dixon Baxey's AC Milan case, like the fan experiences the creativity that was put into that right back in the creative concepting sessions 2 years ago or whatever it was.
Yeah, very much so. And, because the reason I dug into that work was, as a football fan myself, I know what a poison chalice that kind of job can be, because you're dealing with fierce passion and you're never going to please everyone. So his response was that it has to be that love of their culture and that resonance and attention to detail that overrides that. Speaking of work in the real world, the first time I came across your Eager branding for the fruit juice, it's good timing, yeah. Was in Barcelona when we were having a beer, and you showed me it in the fridge, and you told me that I wouldn't ever not see it in the fridge of a pub again. And it's been right now. When I walk in, I see it, I tell the friend the story, and it sings. So let's talk about that, because there's an interesting story there with the Tropicana thing and the kind of the story that goes with that.
Yeah, right. So one of the things like I get quite frustrated about in branding generally is people talk with real conviction and certainty about the rules, and very often, like, they aren't real, and these rules are just sort of almost like old wives' tales. They're this stuff that's like been passed down and exaggerated, and often they're just not true. And for me, one really good example of that is like the orange juice category. And in the orange juice category, there's this famous example of Tropicana. And Tropicana rebranded, and they basically fundamentally like changed the look of their pack, fundamentally. And it was a complete disaster. And I believe it supposedly cost like $35 million to basically roll it back. It was such a disaster that they had to sort of undo it and replace it with the old packaging. What happened as a consequence of that is I think people drew the wrong conclusions, which is they thought, like the juice category thought, that there were some sort of weird immutable laws of juice where unless an orange juice had a white carton, it had green writing, it had a picture of a delicious looking orange on the front, unless it had those things, people wouldn't know it was a juice and they wouldn't buy it. And so, I don't know if maybe we've even got the slide coming up, but you started to see the juice category just all looked absolutely identical, because like every single juice, here we go, so all the ones apart from Eager on the left, they all look the same. And the reason for that is because everyone is really, really scared of being the next Tropicana. And they're like, well, we don't want to be the people that cost my company $35 million by, maybe making the pack orange instead of white, or maybe like having blue writing instead of green, or whatever it is. And so the sort of, we looked at that and we were like, well, do you know what? I don't think there is this like weird immutable law of orange juice. Like, I think that's probably not true. And actually, maybe what happened with Tropicana is that maybe they changed the pack and people just didn't recognize Tropicana when they went to buy Tropicana because they made the pack unrecognizable. And so the sales of Tropicana went down. And so back to like the point of branding is designed to make your product feel uniquely recognizable, and the Tropicana rebrand like fucked that up and made it hard to recognize. And so what that did, being able to challenge that rule, that there are no immutable rules of orange juice, that there's no like category code around orange juice, meant that we could make a juice that's here on the left that still is, I hope, obvious it's obvious that's an orange juice. I think if you saw that in a bar or in a supermarket, I think you'd probably guess it was an orange juice, but because it's orange and it says orange on it, but it doesn't look like the rest. And so we could create something like super distinctive that still people were going to know was an orange. There wasn't any danger there. And the reason why we could do that was because we felt comfortable that we could challenge the rules and try and think a little bit differently from all the sort of companies that had much more bigger budgets and probably much more risk about changing. And That's cool. That's also quite flattering, right?
Exactly, yeah, sincerest form of flattery and all that. So, you know, now that we're having this conversation and you're having this conversation a lot out there, digitally and in real life and everything else, you know, does anything change for you as an agency? Is this now even more at the forefront of your mind, or is this something that you've always held dear to? I mean, the challenging these rules, and actually, you know, does it help to strengthen your resolve in doing that by having these conversations and seeing the responses?
Yeah. It just gives us like so much more conviction, and like it is definitely, AI has made it, or is going to make it. It's going to be a force multiplier of mediocrity. It's going to make it really, 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 really easy to make more stuff that looks the same as everything else. And what that does is it means everyone can have a brand, a visual identity that looks fine, that is fine. AI is going to make that easy to have a brand that looks of a certain level. What that means is that it is going to be harder to make something that stands out. And standing out is going to be even more valuable because there's going to be way more people that are the same. And if you can stand out from that crowd, if you can cut through that crowd, that is going to have a real commercial value now, more almost than ever before, because it's going to be much harder. And so the people that can do that, us lot in the room, like us creative people, like our value is going to be even bigger. If we can create stuff that's different, if we can create stuff that rises above this sea of mediocrity, this sea of like fine, like that has got a huge value for companies. And there's a real like commercial value to that. And I think that should give us all like real, number one, like optimism, hopefully, but also real conviction that we have to really focus in on being able to create stuff that is fundamentally looks, feels, sounds, behaves differently to what's out there at the moment. That is going to be even more valuable in the future.
And I believe that how you start to tap into that as an individual is by drawing on your own nuance, you know, your nuances, your quirks, your story, the things that Joseph Campbell, American writer, who he describes it as following your bliss. Follow your bliss. Just go towards it. It doesn't matter how weird the thing is, how unconventional, how untrendy the thing is. It could be the weirdest little thing that you're into. Follow it. Make that sing in your portfolio. I think that every agency leader that I've spoken to in this industry values character and individuality and difference above all else.
Yeah. And now, like, as you know, students and graduates, like coming into this industry, like the bar has been raised in terms of competence, and like it's easy to make stuff look good. It's much easier now to make, you know, cool mock-ups and things like that, and to make the design look tight. But the one thing still that really stands out, the thing that we look for, is like the weirdness, the excitement. Like when we see a folio, we see a piece of work that gets us excited, it's not because it's well executed. That's helpful, but that is easier now. The thing that makes it stand out is like the weirdness that comes from that sort of personal expression. That person, that whatever they're a designer, or a writer, a creative, whatever it is, who's put themselves out there and done something different. Like that is so valuable for us. We need that. And it will be so valuable to our clients when that person comes to work with us. So yeah, that's the thing, that difference. That's what gets us excited.
Yeah, and to echo that from a freelance point of view, my breaks into the industry came as a combination of not my knowledge and passion, the things I knew about, the things that I'd expressed with passion and was visibly so, the uniqueness of the style, which was informed by me as a human being, my lived experience, the things I gave a shit about. And just sheer difference, like you said. I remember going to see Roger Browning, who was the design director at The Guardian at the time. You know, maybe one client under my belt at the time. And the things that he pulled from my portfolio were the most kind of antagonistic, partisan work that I'd created, sometimes just to make my studio mate laugh, because that's just what was making us laugh at that point. I did this poster where it was Mike Tyson versus Maggie Thatcher, and it was ridiculous. This line-drawn, old-school boxing poster. I did it as part of a series called the Versus series, where we just pitted these fictitious boxing matches of people from the wildest corners of the earth against each other. It was nothing. It's because it made us feel something. That was the stuff that got me my first client outside of editorial, which was Channel 4 for a TV advert and for The Guardian. And I remember being shocked at the time, and I shouldn't have been shocked because I was populating my portfolio with this stuff. But to see it in motion and to see it picked up by somebody I respected that much in industry changed everything for me, because it validated me as an individual.
And you can see it like in your work now, right? Like your work has got like a real distinctive point of view. It looks different to anything else out there. It feels like it's come from here rather than here. So it is you. And that's what people are buying, isn't it? Like that difference, that point of view, that heart overhead, that's what people are buying. That's what people are getting excited about. That's what's driving those commissions. And like you, I guess, have built your career on like that distinctiveness.
Yeah, and it's the only way I've ever been able to do things, because if I'm not truly passionate, I find it very hard to motivate myself. It's why I underwhelmed in my GCSEs. It's why because I hadn't found my thread, my passion. So that's how I make work. But I have to check. It's also worth saying I have to check myself all of the time. I've got 16 years in the game now. Still, I routinely have to pull myself back from falling into process and comfort zones and being distracted by trends. I always have to remind myself of that voice.
It's arguably harder now, isn't it? Because you want to fall back on your experience, doing things the way you've always done them.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I'm the same. Like, I have to check myself with that and question everything, because it's too easy to take those shortcuts.
Yeah.
And if you take the shortcuts, you end up with the same.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, about the Ragged Edge staff bringing something to the table that's not a pre-existing idea. I think it's vitally important to read wide, to keep constantly changing your inspiration, looking for sources new, doing things that make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, changing up the people you surround yourself with. I think you constantly have to fertilize the mind to stay current and to stay fresh. And I think you have to course correct as well.
We do a lot. I think as a group of people, we're quite introspective, and we're constantly thinking about what we could have done better, what would work better next time. And I think it's in some ways like it infuriates some of the team, because we just constantly want to change everything all the time, and we've got this like quite well-honed process for the projects that we do. Like our branding projects go through a pretty robust process that everybody understands and is clear, and we know how long each bit's going to take, how long each bit's going to cost, how many people need to be working on which bit at which time. And that, like, really, we should probably stick to that. But like the whole time we're questioning it, and we want, like, the creative team are like, well, maybe we could do this bit a bit differently, and maybe we can, move this bit around. And that is really, really important. And I think, were we not to do that, we would be coming up with, ideas would slowly start to feel more and more similar to the last stuff, because we're going through the same process and we're putting all the same inputs in, and maybe we're going to get some of the same outputs. So it's our job to keep challenging ourselves and basically force ourselves out of our comfort zones.
Well, just at lunchtime now, you and I talked about the importance of changing your environment and maybe sometimes just getting out into the city and having a day where you're out and about and you meet people and you drink coffee rather than the same four walls. Now, don't get me wrong, the reality means that most of us have to have a base, we have to have a go-to place, and we have to meet client deadlines. Therefore, we have to some degree, have schedules. You can't just completely throw everything out the window and be all rock star about it.
I wish I could.
But within that, you can certainly innovate and you can change things up and remain responsive to that. Let's just touch upon I don't know how to term it. Is it 3 principles? This is something you covered in your talk.
Right.
There's the von Restorff effect. If you could tell us about that, I found that really interesting.
When we're working with clients, and we're trying to persuade them that, all this stuff that I've talked about today, that's about, is it so important for you as a client that your brand and your identity feel different? They're not just going to take our word for it. Sometimes they do. But sometimes we need to, like, really strongly argue our case. And what's really helpful, what we find really helpful, is to give them some sort of tangible, proven psychological effects. And there's 3 that we find quite helpful, that I think are quite powerful. The first one is the von Restorff effect, which is this psychological effect that was discovered in the 1930s by this lady called Hedwig von Restorff. And basically what she proved, and this kind of sounds obvious, but it's very powerful, is that if someone is presented with a set of things, say it might be words, they are more likely to remember the word that's different. And so I'll give you an example. Like, in a list of that goes something like, I don't know, chair, stool, table, chipmunk, armchair, like, you're all remembering one word right now, and it probably isn't stool, it's chipmunk, right? And that's because that's the word that's different. And that applies across everything. Visual, verbal, like, people remember stuff that's different. And so when you think about that, like, the power of difference is so important. If you're creating a brand, you want to create a brand that's memorable, create something that's different. See if I can remember them. So there's another one called the mere exposure effect, which is really interesting, which is basically, I think when we all see stuff for the first time, see something new and fresh, different for the first time, often as, like, human beings are hardwired to, like, react quite negatively to it. And I think that comes from, like, ancient times of, like, running away from threats and things. If something unfamiliar, you don't want to, you've got to be careful. And so if you're creating something different, we've all seen creative work that's put up on the internet that people slam because it feels different or it feels uncomfortable. But what tends to happen, and this is a proven psychological effect, is that over time, you start to like it more. The more you see something, the more you like it. And so if you think about all these famous logos and brands and things that maybe got a horrible reception when they were launched, whether it is, I always talk about the London 2012 Wolf Ollins London Olympics logo. They got this horrible reaction when it launched, including from me. But now, like, you look back on it and people think that's one of the best pieces of best branding scheme, like, of all time. It's a classic. And that's because you get more familiar with it and you start to like it more as you do. And then so that's the mere exposure effect. And then the third one is called the red sneaker effect. And basically the idea with the red sneaker effect, and I need to get some red sneakers to prove this for you. The white ones, I'm going to work on this. But basically, if you do something differently, like you show up on stage and you're wearing red sneakers or something like that, people infer that because you're doing that thing differently to what's expected, they infer status on you. They just assume that you've got the right to do that, and so they value your opinion more highly than if you're dressed the same as everybody else. And that's the same. That works the same with branding and things. So something that's different, not only are people more likely to remember it because of the von Restorff effect, but also they're more likely to value it more highly because of what's called the red sneaker effect, which has been like tested as well. There's some nuances to it, but basically something that's different gets valued more highly than something that looks the same as everything else.
It's brilliant. I love it. I love learning about stuff like that, the psychology behind it all, and it's utterly fascinating, but really not that complex. Like you say, you hear it and you go, yeah, I kind of knew that, and I've always behaved as such. But to hear it explained and see the origin of it is fascinating. I imagine we're coming in pretty close to time. This has been really, really good. I guess to sign off, we've probably covered a lot of them, but are there any sort of, as somebody who invariably will recruit new talent in the industry, is there something, are there any points of encouragement, pieces of advice, things, whether it be a portfolio, an attitude, a character, what would you pass on to this audience of people who are looking to get into our industry today?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's have confidence in yourself and in what makes you different. Like, whatever makes you different makes you more valuable in a creative industry, in a creative agency, or whatever you want to go on and do. And sometimes it's easy to think, oh my God, this thing that I do, or this way that I look, or this way that I work is different, and so no company is going to value that. But actually, what we are all looking for is that thing. So that thing that makes you different is a thing that makes you really, really valuable in this industry. And I really want everybody here, if you don't remember anything else, I guess, like, please just come away with that. Come away with that confidence to be yourself. Come away with that confidence to express yourself. Come away with that confidence to put your head above the parapet. Be different. Embrace that, because that is the thing that has the real power right now. And I think in all the technological advances, AI and everything else, that is the thing that's going to carry you forward. And so please embrace that.
Yeah, just to echo that, the tools will come and go. They always have done, they always will. But what's been here with us since the dawn of time is storytelling and human emotion and that's what elevates us above merely surviving, and that is what makes this industry so magic. So I think that just about brings us to a close. Happy to take any audience questions if anybody's got some.
Hi. I was wondering, you talk a lot about being different and everything, but how would you go about it when you have been criticized so much for that difference? As I might talk for a lot of assigned female at birth, but being different has been perceived quite negatively in many cases with people I know that express themselves quite differently. What would you suggest we do to, stay true to ourselves, but still progress and be different?
To acknowledge your individual situation, I'm a white bloke. I've had for the wrong reasons, I've had a good, do you know what I mean? The landscape has favoured me. That said, I believe that those unique traits and what makes you different, I think that finding your tribe and finding your people and finding people who help you to celebrate that in whatever form that takes on. I think we're social creatures, and there's a lot of science about why we need positive social relationships. And I think as far as creativity goes, those tribes and those environments and doing that in person really helps you to celebrate that and to see how other people respond to that too. So I think that seeking that, taking your ideas and your voice and your lived experience and trying to find environments where that can flourish and evolve is really important. I can't obviously, to say where that might be, but I think that where you live, how you create your own environment, how you interact with others will only help to give you clues as to where that might, really enable you as an individual in the world. I don't know if that helps to answer the question at all. Yeah.
Thank you.
I would echo that as somebody who runs an agency, and again, like, okay, Ben, like, not had lots of these experiences, but the agencies now and the creative industry is looking for difference. Like, we really are. There's, like, for lots of very important reasons, like, we are looking for people that are different, that can bring different experiences to the table. And so have confidence that there are people looking for that. There really are. There really, really are. And, like, you know, it won't be everybody. And, like, maybe there's going to be some no's. But there are people out there that are really, really going to value that, because they know, like, that is what is going to drive them forward. Like, we as a creative industry need different experiences, because those different experiences are going to bring, like, different work out into the world. So it is valued. It won't necessarily be by everybody, but there will be people that will really embrace that.
Yeah, and just to elaborate on that, one of the biggest sources of magic that I've had in this career is the sheer range of human beings in my world now. I love it. I love it. From the moment I walked away from the subservience of high school and into art college and saw people who were different to me, who had a different lived experience and another story, oh my, that illuminated my life so much, and I've been addicted to it ever since. And I think that, I can't speak for everybody, but I think we are an industry that I would hazard a guess has a majority of decent people who also want to celebrate that. So I think you're in a good space for that. That's, again, to preface what I said before, that's just my standpoint, you know, so I might be wrong there, but I love it. I have 4-year-old twins, and we live in Salisbury, which is very middle class, very safe place, which has its benefits, but I try to get them to London as much as I can. And I recently took them to Bike Storms, which is a massive ride out of kids riding bikes in the parks and the roads in London, founded by a guy called Max Ferrari, who'd lost about 25 of his friends to murder through gang violence in his younger years. So I wanted to get them among that energy and that positive outlet for people who had a tough start in life, and it's something I put great value on. Being in this industry has taught me that is really, really important, not just in the industry, but as a human being. So I try to banish that kind of safeness that my kids are going to have growing up in Salisbury and throw them into these wilder environments and seek that out, because it's amazing and it's potent, and it's what helps us all to get better at ideas generation and seeing the world through more open eyes.
Hi, thank you for the talk. My name is Yutechi, and I'm currently like a planning/strategy intern already at a marketing agency. And I guess when you sort of earlier spoke about sort of the juggle between like the incentives of social media and like sort of the algorithm, I guess I wanted to ask, how as an agency do you sort of like reconcile obviously, because you sort of rely arguably on like stats and the algorithm to show like that you're getting a return on your investments, that you're like proving that, you know, people care about what you're campaigning about. I guess, how do you like navigate trying to be different, trying to be original with your ideas, and also trying to get that return on investment without like doing what everyone else is doing?
So it was quite hard to hear, but I think what you're asking is, in this world where you've got these algorithms and like that short-term ROI, as a result, everyone's chasing instant engagement, instant growth, instant likes, retweets, sales, whatever they are. Like, how do you get people to think beyond that? Is that the question?
Yeah, I was just kind of asking how, as an agency, like you reconcile, because you have to sort of chase those things to prove that what you're doing is like working, but you talk so much about being different. And yeah, I guess I was just asking, how do you like reconcile that?
Yeah, so I guess it's a really good question. And like particularly in branding, it's really hard. Like, we have to work really hard to figure out how to measure the success of something. With brand particularly, it's a long-term investment. Like, getting a rebrand isn't necessarily going to change everything overnight. And so we have to try and educate our clients about what matters and what we're trying to do, and kind of like measure the right things, and get people thinking about like, really, success looks like this. It doesn't look like, you know, increasing engagement by 0.2% on your next 5 Instagram reels or whatever. So it's about making sure that they're clear on measuring the right things. But it's also like using things like those psychological effects to show people like, this actually will if we do this right, if we create this difference, it will deliver a return because it's going to make you stand out. If you stand out, it's going to make people notice you. If people notice you, they're more likely to remember you. If they remember you, they're more likely when they next go to a shop and try and buy some orange juice, they're more likely to choose your orange juice than the one next to it. And so it's just helping people to understand how this stuff works and try and move them away from those short-term measures to something a bit more longer and a bit more meaningful. And it's a hard thing to do. Yeah.
Can I ask that, to that end? I would imagine there's great importance in your team building within the agency to make sure that you've got people who can articulate and sort of argue and make those conversations in a simple but welcoming way. Yeah.
And like obviously everything we do as an agency is based around that, so we're pretty good at talking about that stuff. And I think one of the things that we've learned to do quite well is before even someone starts to work with us, we're already having those conversations. So we're always saying, like, if you work with us, we are going to do this. It's so important that you are also bought into this approach. We're going to push you. We're going to challenge you. We're going to do stuff that's different because we believe that's going to work. And if they end up working with us, it will be because of that, not despite that. And so then when it gets to the stage where people are actually doing the work, the client is ready for that and is expecting that, and we've kind of already had those arguments. So hopefully it'll be easier for the creative team when they're presenting these wild different concepts. Like the client will be ready to see something and actually expecting something weird and wacky and different because that's what they've been primed to see. Yeah. So it's a long term, it's basically, you can't just spring something on them and say, this is good because it's different. You have to have that conversation in advance. And then multiple times along the journey.
Yeah, and from an individual standpoint, and speaking now with particular reference to the kind of the traps of social media and basing responses on the validation of your skills and creativity, be really wary of that. Because I can't tell you the amount of things that I've shared where it's underwhelmed in terms of statistics or engagement, and then X amount of time later, I'll be in the pub with somebody and a creative director that I respect or whoever else will say, oh, that stuff that you did was awesome. We've included it in a pitch. And I think, oh God, I thought nobody looked at that stuff, So it's not about those numbers. I think you have to stick to your guns and keep using your voice regardless of what the comeback, what the likes are, what the engagement. I use all those platforms. They're really important and they can be really good. But I think if you base all of your worth on the engagement on those platforms, that's damaging, and that just goes against creative self-expression. So just be really wary of that.
Thank you so much for the fantastic talk. So I'm really curious if, with the brands that you work, especially the more established ones like TransferWise, do you try and balance what the existing customers are expecting? Because I see that you do very bold visual identities, so I'm curious how you're trying to balance.
How we figure out like what the customer actually wants. Is that what you're asking?
Sorry. So how do you not scare away the old customers, the existing customers?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good question. I think people are kind of more resilient to this stuff than the client often imagines. I think the idea of scaring someone away because you change the color from blue to green, like, come on. But that is what the client sometimes thinks. But I think, obviously real life, people aren't going to be scared away by that kind of thing. But obviously what we'll have to do is we'll have to go through a process. We'll have to, often with something like Wise, we had to do some testing along the way and make sure that people didn't reject it. We also, with Wise very specifically, that's a much more established brand, as you've pointed out. And there is equity in some of the elements. And so what we decided to do is, instead of like changing the logo, so we changed it a bit, but we didn't really fundamentally change it. We thought, let's keep the logo, because that's the thing that people already recognize. That's something that has equity. That means if we change everything else, they've still got that. They're still going to recognize it. They still won't be scared off by that. So keeping that thing using a green that they already had in their brand, so they kind of had it in the card and we used it everywhere. Again, retaining a piece of equity. And then that kind of gave us license with some of the other stuff. So if you know the work, the typeface, we have these things called the tapestries, which are these like graphic kind of elements that look a bit like money. We could go wild and wacky with those things because we had some elements that were retaining that equity and like wouldn't scare people off.
It's about essence, isn't it? It's about the idea of how many parts of a thing can you take away and it still be identifiable and still sing in the same way, because then you know just how much you can change things and how much you should and shouldn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
It is a very valid question, though.
Well, thank you all very much for listening. I do the podcast weekly, The Creative Condition. It's free on Spotify and all that stuff, so go and have a listen. There's boatloads of these conversations, so I hope it's of some help, and get in touch. And thank you for coming. Massive thank you to Max Ottignon, Ragged Edge, D&AD for making this one happen. I hope you enjoyed the live dynamic. I apologise if on occasion there was interference. Big room, big crowd, a lot of people, a lot of moving parts, scheduled to keep to. These things are not perfect, and this show has never been, and probably, well, there's not probably, it won't ever be perfect. Part of the reason I think why people listen is it's very raw, like everything I do, but it's authentic. I hope I can give you that much at least in return. So thank you for sticking with it. If you're a long-term listener, I love you, I appreciate you, I cherish you. But if you haven't reviewed me yet, I'm going to give you a slap. No, I'm not kidding. But please, a little review, rating, subscription. It really, really helps the show. Coming up, we've got staff writer at the New Yorker and author of the brilliant Filter World, How Algorithms Flatten Culture, Kyle Chaker. We've got multidisciplinary artist Sarah Prinsloo coming up. Joanna Henley, formerly known as Misled, is coming back to the show, and that's a deep one for our third conversation. Professor Cal Chin, historian specialising in the history of the English working class. Professor Carlos Moreno talking about the 15-minute city concept, about community, about lowering emissions, and about creativity, purpose. That's a big episode too. So much going on this show. Thank you for being a part of it. If you're new, welcome. I hope you enjoy and like what you hear. On the lookout for new show partners to go alongside the wonderful founding sponsor, Illustration X. Check out their global range of illustration and animation portfolios at illustrationx.com. And of course, the Ukrainian Institute supporting the embattled Ukrainian community, creative community, at a horrible time of hardship during this awful war. Please support them. ui.org.ua. The Creative Condition book is out now. You can get your signed paperback copies at bentallonwriter.com/shop and on Amazon Kindle store. Please do it. Please jump in. The feedback has been wholesome and exclusively positive, so thank you for that. That's about it from me. The Anatomy of Creativity map is coming up soon as part of the coaching. It's going to be launching. Some more news on that in due course, probably in the autumn. Love you all. Thank you for listening. Have an awesome week. Stay creative. Nice one, guys.